It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, everybody. I am Jeff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. This week, I'm returning to the Guillermo del Toro pool with one of his earlier films, 2001's The Devil's Backbone. And it's known in Spanish as El Espinazo del Diablo. But not only am I returning to Del Toro's filmography, but this is another one of the movies that Del Toro has done that shows a depiction of life during the Spanish Civil War. That war ravaged the country of Spain in the 1930s. And I've discussed the difficult and complicated war when I talked about Del Toro's later masterpiece, Pan's Labyrinth. But in short, the war concerned the Republicans, which in Spain were the leftists loyal to the Popular Front government of the Second Spanish Republic, and the insurrectionist nationalists that were a combined front of various groups of traditionalists and conservatives and so forth. Many would call this a dress rehearsal for World War II, in which nationalism was kind of winning out all over the world and ended up taking over Spain until the death of General Francisco Franco in 1975. What made the Civil War in Spain pretty difficult was that it was also mostly along class and religious lines as well. The more powerful and influential Spanish people were often aligned with the insurrectionists, while the workers tended to be more liberal, which we typically see as being the case in most of world history. It was a struggle between dictatorship and republican democracy, revolution and counter-revolution, and of course, fascism and communism, or at least maybe something a little bit more socialist, if not straight up communist. It's kind of part of that first half of the 20th century in which humanity kind of showed how bad it truly can be in the tumultuous wave of nationalism that was spreading all over the world. And maybe, all things considered, it should get a hell of a lot more attention these days than it obviously does. But Del Toro definitely likes to tell stories during this time frame, and The Devil's Backbone was his first. This film can very well be compared alongside to Pan's Labyrinth as almost being like sibling films. They would be a pretty good double feature, maybe a tough one, but it could be done. Like Pan's Labyrinth, The Devil's Backbone won pretty universal acclaim. But this gothic horror was independently produced by Agustin Almodovar, who is the younger brother to acclaimed filmmaker Pedro Almodovar. In fact, Agustin's film company has produced all of Pedro's films since 1986. The idea for the film came to Del Toro even before he made his debut film Cronos, which, by the way, hold tight, we'll be getting the Cronos here in a few weeks. But the original draft of The Devil's Backbone was to be set during the Mexican Revolution and would not have had a ghost of a child haunting the place, but some sort of a three-armed Jesus Christ. And I want to see that movie. Del Toro rewrote the film several times, trying out different creatures that would become the monster of the movie. But in this, we have ourselves a ghost story that revolves around an orphanage. The movie opens with a narrator asking, what is a ghost? Is it something that appears living but actually dead? Is it a mistake or a tragedy doomed to repeat? Is it a blurred photograph or something that once was? While these questions are being asked, we see a child lying on the ground with a massive head wound. Another child, distraught by the sight, ultimately appears to place the injured child in the water and weighs him down, essentially drowning the already massively bleeding and dying kid, or just getting rid of the body one way or another. But later we meet Carmen and Dr. Caceres, who run a small orphanage. Now this duo running the place are loyalists who are also stashing a large cache of gold to support the Republicans. When two supporters bring a new orphan, Carlos, to the home, we see an inert bomb that is embedded in the main courtyard of the orphanage. This fascinates Carlos, and for a little while he spends some time tapping at the bomb, collecting things like slugs from around the bomb and so forth. But he also sees something else in one of the windows, a decaying boy. Now, we learn that Franco's army has, in the past, attacked the orphanage and, or attacked at least the very nearby area that the orphanage is in. And the bomb is a constant reminder that the children are also casualties in this civil war. Carlos is upset when he's first picked on by an orphan bully named Jaime, and then realizes that the tutor who brought him here, another loyalist that works often with Caceres and Carmen, is leaving him behind. Carmen, realizing Carlos is a little frail and probably will not adjust well to being left at the orphanage the way he was, asks the doctor to befriend him. And some of the kids are upset that Carlos is taking Santi's bed. Now, Santi is the child we saw with the head injury and later appeared to Carlos as a ghost in the courtyard. Meanwhile, the caretaker of the orphanage, Jacinto, is someone who has grown up in the orphanage. He spent like 15 years there, but doesn't really want anybody to know that. But he and his fiancée Conchita plan to get married, and at least she has plans to move to Granada. Now, Jacinto is working with a couple of other guys who seem kind of like ruffians, and they are trying to seek the treasure that's being kept at the orphanage. They think they know where those bars of gold are, but they just have to have the right key to get into the safe. Now, on his first night at the orphanage, Carlos hears someone outside the bedroom. He accidentally spills the children's water, and he and Jaime have to sneak into the kitchen to fill the water jugs, even though the kitchen is off limits at night. Jaime says that if you listen real closely to the bomb in the courtyard, you can hear it ticking as if it's about to go off at any time, which is an interesting parallel that this movie uses, is this ticking inert bomb and the things that will happen later in the movie. But while Carlos is filling his jug, the knives and scissors that are suspended on a bar over the cutting table falls, and Jacinto hears the commotion and goes to investigate. When he doesn't really see anything, he uses the opportunity to test some of the keys that he's taken to try to open the safe that the gold is stashed in. And after failing and having his lantern's flames blown out, Jacinto leaves, and this allows Carlos to basically go undetected. But before returning to the bedroom, Carlos goes to the cellar under the kitchen and finds this kind of pit of gross brownish water. He sees and hears Santi running around, and Santi taps him on the shoulder but disappears, leaving only floating droplets of water and blood around him. He then reappears to tell Carlos that many will die and chases him out of the kitchen. Before returning to bed, one of Jaime's gang hits Carlos's jug with a slingshot rock and shatters it. Jacinto comes out and disciplines Carlos and basically tells Carmen and Caceres about it. So the next morning, Caceres asks Carlos who was his accomplice the night before. He doesn't rat out Jaime, and this wins some favor with some of the gang. However, Caceres he's pretty smart. He notices that, the kids are so hungry because all they have to eat for breakfast is bread and milk, and they're so hungry that they should be focused on eating. But as Carlos walks by, anybody who raises their heads will be the accomplices. Now, because he doesn't rat them out or anything like this does win favor with some of the gang. But when Carlos tries to go to the cellar again to speak with the ghost of Santi, he gets into an altercation with Jaime, but after he finds out that Jaime doesn't know how to swim after he pushed him into the pit of water, he goes and saves him. This kind of forms a little bit more friendship between Jaime and Carlos. But Jacinto finds the kids and the knife that Jaime was going to use to scare Carlos with. But to keep them from saying anything to Caceres or Carmen, Jacinto cuts Carlos's cheek. So while he's getting that stitched up, he asks Caceres if he believes in ghosts. And Caceres says he's a man of science. He talks of a condition called the devil's backbone and shows a fetus in a jar whose backbone is on the outside of the skin. He says that people who claim that this is the sort of stuff that that's based on a curse, or these are the type of people who will believe in ghosts, and and they'll say that these things happen to children who shouldn't be born. But he doesn't really believe any of that stuff. He says that disease and poverty are the only things that exist, not curses or ghosts or demons. Now, that night, some of the kids do tell Carlos about the night that the bomb fell. That was also the night that Santi disappeared. Some think that Santi got scared and ran away. Maybe some local shepherds found him and now care for him. Maybe he got found by what they called cutthroats who, quote, drained his blood and sold it to the rich to cure their tuberculosis. Jaime listens from down the hall as they talk about Santi. Meanwhile, Santi is listening from the kitchen window. Now, Carlos continues to find out more about Santi. He finds a sketchbook that belongs to Jaime that has a picture that he's drawn of a kid with a bleeding head wound. So he decides to go to speak to Santi, and he tells Santi that he doesn't want anyone to die, but Santi only repeats that line about how many will die. Meanwhile, in town, Caceres witnesses an international brigade brought in by the nationalists, capturing Carlos's old tutor and basically executing him on the spot. Knowing the nationalists are getting closer, Caceres suddenly has a change of heart and tries to convince Carmen to begin evacuating with the children immediately. Jacinto overhears this and confronts Carmen, who he has had a sexual affair with, even though he is engaged to marry Conchita, but he demands that all of the gold from the safe be given to him. Caceres intervenes with a shotgun and he sends Jacinto away. So the children are beginning to pack for the evacuation. Conchita finds Jacinto has returned and emptied some gas cans in the kitchen with the plan to basically light it and blow up the place. Now, Conchita, having confronted him, shoots Jacinto in the arm, and to escape, he goes ahead and lights the gasoline to blow up the kitchen. In the meantime, Carmen has gone to help one of the other teachers, but neither of them escape in time before it explodes. The explosion blows up one of the trucks that was going to be used in the escape, and it's also killed several of the kids and Carmen. While Conchita goes to town to get some help, Caceres stays behind with the kids and waits for Jacinto to return so that he can do what he should have done in the first place, kill him. That night, Jaime tells Carlos about what happened to Santi. They went to the cellar to collect slugs, and Santi heard Jacinto trying to get into the safe for the gold. And when they tried to escape, Jacinto slapped Santi around to try to find out what he saw. Jacinto ultimately pushes Santi against a stone column, and that's what he smashed his head on to cause the head wound. Jaime goes to his friend, but he can't really do anything, and he's pretty broken up about it. But Jacinto returns to dump the body into the pit of water in the cellar. Jaime was too scared to tell anyone about what he saw. Later, that's when the bomb was dropped but never exploded. He had always been afraid of Jacinto, but not anymore. He tells Carlos that the next time he sees him, he plans to kill him. Now, Conchita, still walking to town the following morning, is found by Jacinto and his really shady associates. When she refuses to apologize to him for shooting him, Jacinto stabs and kills her. Jacinto and his thug friends then arrive at the orphanage, expecting to find everyone dead, but when they see Caceres, Jaime, and Carlos, they decide to leave, opting to wait it out for the old man to die. Later, Carlos goes to see Santi and asks what he wants, and Santi says he only wants one thing. He wants Jacinto brought to him. At the same time, Caceres has died, and Jaime was ultimately nabbed by Jacinto, who was kind of sneaking around the place. He makes the kids unbury the safe from the rubble from the explosion. Jaime discovers that Jacinto has killed Conchita, a girl that he admired, and he decides to rally the kids to help him kill Jacinto for what he did to Santi. They get a little assistance from an unexpected ally, the ghost of Dr. Caceres. Now, Jacinto is left behind by his associates, who are frustrated that they broke into the safe only to find papers and keepsakes and nothing of gold. Jacinto, though, does find it after his buddies leave. It was stashed in the wooden leg that Carmen used. He packs up the gold and goes to find the kids, and they lead him to the cellar. Using spears that they fashioned from like broom handles and various other sticks, the boys start stabbing Jacinto and throw him into the water pit for Santi to take his revenge. The remaining boys leave for town as the ghost of Dr. Caceres watches them walk away from the doorway of the orphanage. So let's get to my 3 things I like about The Devil's Backbone. First up, the characters that occupy this movie are fantastic. For the most part, the children don't worry about the war or anything else like that. They're more concerned with eating what little that they're given and their own cliques and hierarchies. They do talk about the war briefly, but not with the same weight that the adults do. They are still children unburdened by the world. The adults, on the other hand, well, they're the real sad stories of this movie. Jacinto is haunted by his past and wants to run away from it while still being a cruel antagonist. Caceres and Carmen are haunted by their ideals and loyalty. They know their time is coming to an end. And while Caceres still hopes for a long time for France or England to step in and help the Republicans, Carmen knows the country will soon be taken over by Franco. She even tells Caceres that he should return to Argentina while he still has a chance. But his optimism refuses to leave those he cares about. And it even seems that Conchita is trapped and maybe haunted by her own hopes of finding romance and escaping with the attractive Jacinto, even though he's a jerk, runs with a bad crowd, and has had that affair with Carmen. Now, what's interesting is that the children also show signs of potentially turning into the adults that we see in this movie too, almost like a loop. Clearly, Carlos and Caceres are very similar with intelligence and high moral standing. Obviously, Jaime, if things don't change or didn't change throughout the course of this movie, he was destined to ultimately become another Jacinto when he grew up. Also, Jaime admires Conchita from afar, just as Jacinto did Carmen when he was young. These are all very well crafted and paralleled characters. Second, of course, the effects work on Santi are amazing. He's creepy, but he's also kind of sad. Del Toro does something that I very much like when it comes to ghost stories. Santi is not used as a jump scare. He lingers, but the camera doesn't often linger on him. So the use of Santi is really pitch perfect in this movie. He's something left behind that is unsettling and creeps up onto you. As for the design work of Santi, I love how he has these kind of floating globules that look like either water or blood or muck from the water that he was thrown into by Jacinto. It kind of came with him into his ghostly form, and even when you don't see him, some of the floating stuff around him still remains behind. It's a wonderful take on ghosts and apparitions that I had never seen before. But also, if you'd have told me that's your idea for how a ghost would appear that's been put in water like that, it makes total sense to me. And third, this is a gothic horror movie told in the post-gothic era. Yes, much of the architecture of this movie does evoke some of those gothic stylings that you might see in many of the European set horror movies, but The Devil's Backbone more emulates the emotional tones that a lot of gothic horror has. This movie is steeped with very deep emotions. And we find out at the end, when the lines are repeated, that it was Dr. Caceres that is talking about what a ghost is and asking those questions. In his final words to Carmen, a woman that he loved, even though she didn't really reciprocate in the same way, he told her a sweet little poem told from the perspective of someone who's dying. So he had this very poetic way that he speaks. And he also had a very poetic way that he thinks. It's like goodness will win out in the Civil War, when unfortunately it didn't. But he also knows in the back of his mind that definitely comes to the forefront of his mind by the end of the second act, that the type of man he is, the type of person his side, or that, is on the side that he's on in the Civil War, that's coming to an end. He and his ilk are not for the future, and it's really a perfect summation within the lines that open the movie and close the movie. And that's what we'll leave this episode with. So these are the final lines that Dr. Caceres spoke. And it really kind of takes on that whole emotion of what this movie is. But what is a ghost? A tragedy condemned to repeat itself time and again? An instant of pain, perhaps? Something dead which still seems to be alive? An emotion suspended in time, like a blurred photograph? Like an insect trapped in amber, a ghost. That's what I am. And with that, we wrap up this week's Monster Mondays. Now, don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on filmseizure.com, as well as places where fine podcasts are found, like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Audible, and Spotify. Additionally, you can hop on over to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram and follow us by just simply searching for Film Seizure. And while you're at it, why don't you head over to my website, bmovieenema.com. You can read new text articles each and every Friday. You can also follow bmovieenema on Facebook and Twitter by searching for just that, bmovieenema. Hey, why not go over to YouTube and subscribe to the bmovieenema channel, where you can find episodes of the movie hosting show that I do and see a bunch of the clips that I grab and use for articles. But until next week, stay spooky.